Hello, I'm Paul Harris, Angling Advisor to the Irish Tourist Board. I've got the very pleasant task of going around and visiting many of the great fisheries in Ireland. This was all started some 40 years ago when a group of visiting anglers came over to see for themselves what sort of fishing was available in this country. What they discovered, and many anglers after them have found, is truly an angler's paradise. Those anglers, when they first came, had rather difficult problems getting here, sorting things out. Things are a lot easier for us now. There's access points from various parts in England, both by air and sea, to bring you to the part of Ireland you want to visit for the sort of fishing you want to do. When you arrive in Ireland, well, the accommodation and the Irish friendliness and hospitality is legendary. Whether you be stopping in farmhouse, town and country home, hotel, whatever, you'll find something to suit you, to suit your pocket, to suit your requirements. And whenever you stay in an Irish hotel, you become more a member of the family than a paying guest. To fishing in Ireland is very good, but you have to do your homework first before you come out. You can get this information from various sources, from fishing friends, from tackle dealers, but more importantly, contact the Irish Tourist Board. They'll be able to give you lots of information on ferries, on accommodation, and even down to various fishing maps and detailed maps, which will help you get onto the fishing as soon as you arrive. It's important not to waste your time when you arrive in Ireland. A week's holiday can go all too quickly. If you're bringing the family over, which many people do, they can also provide information for what the ladies can do, be it a little bit of shopping, places of interest to visit, horse riding or many other activities. Although 150,000 people come to Ireland every year, you'd think the fishing would be crowded, but there's so much water, there's plenty for everybody. Personal company can become a matter of choice. What could be more idyllic than having a lake to yourself for the day? Many come over and fish the famous Irish angling festivals, which attract all the top anglers from the country. Although it's not always the best that win through. Irish fish have got no respect for reputation, and they're quite happy to feed for those that feed them. One of the top visitors to Ireland, who comes many times a year, is Mark Downs, England international. We're with Mark today in County Galway on Ballyquirke Lake, and he's going to see what he can do in the deep water, fishing for roach and bream, and we'll go down and see how he's dealing with those fish today.
We're fishing just outside Galway today, a beautiful looking lake called Ballyquirke. I've been told by the locals it's full of decent sized bream and hybrids. I've been fishing for about an hour and I'm plagued with small roach at the moment. I'm going to bite every single cast. Now with these lakes in the area are so vast, it does take time for bigger fish to move in. And the only way you're going to get the bigger fish to move in is by giving them plenty of feed. Quite a simple mix, it's just basic breadcrumb, a few casters and plenty of maggots in, a few chopped worms, just in case you get a few big bream moving into the swim. That was a small roach bite. And I'm also fishing one of my favourite methods, a slider. It's a very deep stretch of water, this, in excess of 20 feet in areas. And just to show you how deep this is, let's just bait up. I'm holding my hook. I'm fishing a 13-foot rod, and the stop knot is situated just there. It's around 21 foot deep. Now with this particular method, it's best to keep the shotting pattern as simple as possible. I'll show you the shotting pattern in a few minutes, but the reason for doing that is you'll probably notice a little bit windy today, and when you get wind on the water it can cause havoc with these shots as they actually fly through the air. So by keeping the shotting pattern very simple and actually stopping the float before it hits the water, so all the shots lie. These are getting to be a bit of a nuisance at the moment. So when you actually stop the float, all your shots lie in a nice straight line, no tangles at all. I'm fishing a size 16 hook at the moment, double maggot. I've tried double caster to get through the small fish, but at this moment in time there's no bigger fish there, so I'm just plugging away. Right. Always make sure your swim's full of obstructions before you start. I was lucky there. I could have quite easily lost my hook on that. The casting, again, simple. Gently behind the head, flick it out, stop the float so everything lies nice and flat. Sink your line and then open your bail arm. You have to open the bail arm because otherwise the float itself tracks back towards you. And if the float tracks back, you don't actually fish on your ground bait. And don't forget, the secret with this particular venue, or anywhere in Ireland, is keep the feed going in. There's so many lakes in the area, and they are, although Ireland now attracts, what, some 150,000 anglers each year, there's so much water in the area, it's still relatively unfished. And you'll find gradually by building your bait up in the swim, you'll pull more and more and more fish into the swim itself. In fact, I'm so plagued with small fish, I'm going to start feeding fairly close in with a little bit of soft ground bait. And who knows, we might get time to have a little go on the pole later on. Yeah, that was a bite. You can see the fish come up in the... No, missed him. The thing with these small fish, what's happening is they actually pick the bait up. I mean, shredded my bait, that. I'm fishing quite heavy to try and get through them, and what they're actually doing is picking the bait up off the bottom, well, before it gets to the bottom in actual fact, and just holding that last dropper shot up. Let's just cast that again. The wind caught that. Always try and be fairly accurate when you're fishing, obviously, because try and keep your ground bait as tight as you possibly can. Not in one small area, but over a reasonable area. And then you can concentrate the fish and prove to be that much more efficient. And the ground bait I'm feeding is quite heavy, because obviously you don't want a cloudy ground bait, because the cloudy ground bait should actually pull the small. Now you can see that's a bite. The float has come right up in the water. Now, they're getting to be a real nuisance at the moment, these. No size to them at all. Look at that. Lovely little fish. They've never been caught before. And the lake is absolutely teeming with them. But I don't know, day like today I had a little bit of a nuisance. But early days. In fact, what I'm going to try doing is I'm going to put a few balls of ground bait out at one go rather than constant feed, because by constant feeding you might, well, I can see what's happening. I'm pulling the fish up in the water and it's just not allowing my bait to get to the bottom. So feed, wind's getting up again. I'm going to give them 3 or 4 balls. And then not feed again for a while. While making the balls a little bit bigger as well. It means I should get quicker to the bottom. Not be taken by them smaller fish. Make this one a real hard one so it goes straight to the bottom. That's it. At the same time, I'm going to start feeding just a close line, a little bit of ground bait, a few maggots, have a little dabble on the pole in it in a short time, just to let that ground bait settle down out there. Hopefully waiting for them hybrids to move in. So I've been coming to Ireland for quite a few seasons now. It's the first time I've travelled this far west. as coarse fishing goes, it's really unexploited. Oh, that's a better one. That's right on the drop, that. And there's a lot of money being spent in this particular area at the moment, developing fisheries, access points, some beautiful landing stages here. In fact, I've been to 2 or 3 venues not far from here where there's 20, 25 landing stages, ideal for fishing, off making fishing really comfortable. Water's very clear. I'm amazed how clear the water is, especially for the time of year. Nah, these are a waste of time, these. Let's, whoops, no wonder I caught one. That was a bit of a tangle. Let's change tactics for a minute. So I've put a fair amount of stuff out there, but it gets a bit boring catching those. So let's have a little go on a short pole. Let's put that side. I've fed a few small bits of ground bait, and at least it'll give that bait that I've put out, that's about 30 yards, chance to settle. Because at the moment, the more I'm feeding, the more small fish I seem to be pulling into the peg, so we might as well just sit back and wait for a few minutes and just see if we can catch a few on this. This is another simple rig. It's a 1.5 grams. I think it's a Cassini pole float, and I've set it up very basically. It's just, I'll just show you very quickly. I've set it about 7 or 8 foot deep. I've got a bulk about 2 foot away from the hook, which is about a gram and a quarter. And then just 2 blocks of droppers, probably the equivalent of a number 4 or a number 1. 10-inch intervals down to the hook. It's only a small hook, fishing about an 18. And it's still very deep, even though I'm only fishing fairly close. Yep, oh blimey, what's this? Oh, a little rudd. Very similar to a roach in the difference that, well, they look virtually identical, except for the fact that the lower lip on a rudd protrudes as opposed to the roach. It actually goes in on itself. One thing about fishing this method is that if you do get pestered with small fish out there, you can always do this as an interim method. I'm not going to persevere with this for too long because I'm convinced we're going to get some, yeah, we're going to get loads of fish out there. Oh, that's a bit better. Oh, that won't come off. They're still taking a little bit short out there. I'm just going to push that shot up a bit and move that bulk up to there. And that should give me a slightly slower drop. Back it, in we go. Don't forget to keep the bait going in on the ball of ground bait. Oh dear, loads of fish there now. Only small again. They keep me occupied. If this was a match conditions, I'd be thoroughly enjoying this, but I'm anticipating a few better fish. In fact, this particular method, it's a method that's widely used in England on a lot of still water lakes, especially in the summer. And to come to a place like this particular lake, where the fish are in abundance, just help polish up your skills a little bit. In fact, I'm convinced, although this is 6 metres to hand I'm using, we could possibly even get these fish, that's a bad ball of ground bait, probably get these fish 3 and 4 metres. God dear, it's one a bung here now. There's a few little bit better fish out there now. Another roach, whoa. If this was a competition, I'd be trying to catch even quicker than this. I mean, there's certain ways you can catch quicker. You can mix your ground bait a little bit softer and try and get them shallower, because the deeper you keep the fish, obviously, the longer it actually takes for your bait to get down to where the fish are feeding. And by actually putting the ground bait soft, or maybe even loose feeding a few maggots, you can bring that fish right up in the water. The fish are all coming up already because you can tell that the float at times isn't cocking before the bulk actually gets down. Of course, in England, for this particular method, you'd be using probably squats and pinkies, whereas over here, standard big maggots and a few casters are perfectly adequate. I've done some colossal weights on this particular method over here. Oh, there's absolutely tons of fish there now. Oh, a little perch this time. Real match fishing type this is. Another couple and then we'll... You've probably noticed I haven't fed again since I came inside. And the reason is quite simple, because I've been feeding in, you know, every cast inside, you notice that the fish move on to the feed. And these small fish are actually coming right up in the water. And I honestly think by feeding every chuck on my far line, oh, that was a better one. You can see what's happened there, the maggots actually turned over the hook. So many people put the maggots on incorrectly. You've just got to nick them right through the tail. If you put them on too deep, the maggots actually wriggles on the hook and it can sometimes cover the point. And as a result, you end up bumping the fish. Now what's happened is that as soon as the float actually fully settles, you don't actually get the bite because the fish will come right up in the water. I'm fishing probably about 2 foot too deep at the moment. If I was to shallow, I'll probably catch straight away. This is a bit better one. Here we go. Oh, a bit nice if a few of these moved into the peg. About 4 or 5 ounce. In fact, because I've had that one, I'm going to have one more chuck on this. I suppose if you was to get your head down and do this for 5 hours, you'd probably do 20 or 30 pound a roach. Ooh, this is a better one. Yes. Well, that's starting to build quite well on this pole. I was talking to Paul Harris at the Irish Tourist Board and they reckon they get bream up to £6.5. Now, I've been a bit disappointed we haven't caught any skimmers or bream at the moment, but you start catching a few roach like that, that's gorgeous, isn't it? Beautiful fish, very dark. Whoops a daisy. Coming up. Oh dear. Fish are always dark when the water's very clear. And the more coloured the water, the lighter the fish get. Tell you what, you could soon build up a weight doing this. People that come to Ireland, there's 2 trains of thought when you come to Ireland. I like catching fish, full stop. I like catching small fish, I like catching big fish. A lot of people that come for the total pleasure aspect of the fishing, they like to fish a swim feeder. And without a shadow of a doubt, the swim feeder catches more big weights in Ireland than any other method. Oh, it's absolutely solid with fish out there now. Another small one. And the thing you must always remember when you come to Ireland is you must get plenty of bait. Now, bait supply is readily available at the moment. Irish Angling Services, run by Barry Nicholson up at just outside Cavan. He supplies absolutely superb bait. Red maggots, always the favourite bait over here. Casters, of course. If you're fishing for bream, you always need a ruck of casters. And of course, well, it's getting easy now. And of course, don't forget red worms. Once you do get on a shoal of bream, then to be really selective and catch big fish, then you need a lot of red worms. In fact, chopping up red worms in your ground bait works wonders. If you're visiting a new venue in Ireland, it's always best to try and pre-bait the swim you're going to fish the night before. You don't have to pre-bait it with gallons of casters, anything expensive like that. Oh dear. Now another run of small fish here. What's best to do is some rough old brown ground bait or white ground bait, a few maggots, a few worms. Go to the swim the night before that you fancy fishing the next day. Just throw 20 or 30 balls of ground bait in. And it should guarantee that when you turn up next day, any fish that are moving around in that particular area would have settled on your peg. Now obviously if you come over here to fish competitions, you can't do that. You have to, oops, bumped one. You have to take your potluck and fish wherever you draw. But as I say, there's thousands of anglers come over here now, and pre-baiting is essential because the waters are so vast. The worst thing you can do when you come to Ireland is fish a different venue every day, because you never get to know exactly how the venues are fishing. For example, if you come here today, you might have caught next to nothing, and you think to yourself, well, I'm not going back there again. But that's probably the worst decision you could have made, because you've fed that particular peg, by the time you come back next day, you'd have caught quite a few fish. In fact, come for a third day, and you'd probably absolutely emptied it. And talking about emptying it, I'm going to have one more, and then I'm going to have another chuck, see if I can get some of them skimmers. Ooh, another better roach. Oh, it's a perch. Woo! Footballer. Right, let's get back on that big float and see if we can nick a few skimmers before we pack up. Right, before I actually cast this waggler out, let's just have a look at it in a little more detail. Just put my lock on. First of all, the float. This particular float is a Britannia Floats 8 gram and it's loaded. All the loading is right at the base of the float itself. This makes it ideal for when you actually cast for the float to carry under its own weight. There's a tiny swivel that's moulded into the lead base itself. Now this is free running up and down the line, hence the slider. It's prevented from running down to the hook length by a single shot situated about 7 foot above the hook itself. Now 7 foot's a nice depth because A, it makes casting very easy, and B, it gives you plenty of scope for changing your shotting patterns below the dropper shot itself. Moving down from the float, very simple shotting pattern, a 4BB bulk, which is situated about 3 foot above the hook. Another number 1, about 18 inches above the hook. And a final dropper, just 10 or 12 inches above the hook. And the hook length itself, 14, 16 inch hook length. And today I'm using a size 16 or an 18, depending on what size fish you expect to catch. The most critical point is, of course, the sliding knot itself. Let's just find the sliding knot. Of course, the most important aspect of slider fishing is the stop knot itself. I use 2 stop knots, and the reason I do that is quite simple. First of all, when you use one, when you're fishing with a fair amount of lead down or a heavy float, you can tend to actually knock the float further up the line, so in effect lose the depth that you're fishing at. By using a second knot, the one actually acts as a buffer against the other. Therefore you can keep the depth more accurately for a far longer period of time. These knots are quite simple to tie. If you tie your own hooks with a simple loop method, it's identical knot. Instead of whipping the loop round the shank of the hook itself, you just tie it around the shank of the line, tie it around the line. It's dead simple, dead effective, and it doesn't crinkle the line. Some knots you can do, you can over tighten them, pull them really tight, and they're virtually impossible to slide. And when they do slide, they destroy the line. So although you have to do them fairly tight, don't over tighten them. So I mentioned earlier, this peg is about 20 foot deep. And if I just hook that onto there, you can see the stop knot. Where is it? Comes right the way down to there. So I've got about 10 footer rod and another 10 footer rod, a 10 footer line there, so it's 20 foot deep. Now another thing I found is when you're slider fishing, it pays to have fairly decent sized rings on your rods. I use hard chrome rings on all of my rods, and the reason I do that is quite simple. They've got big eyes, therefore I can use a fairly heavy slider knot line. The line I'm using today for the slider knot is £3. It's ideal. Flies through the rings nice and smoothly and it traps against the float. If you're using rings with lined eyes, you'll find that the eyes in the rod itself is quite small. Therefore, you might have to come down to maybe a £2 slider knot. But whatever tackle you're using, then you have to do your slider knot to suit. Let's see if them skimmers are out there. Don't forget, feed the line through the float and wait for it to settle. And I'm still not going to feed because I don't want to bring those shoals of small roach again. Hopefully the amount of feed I've put out earlier has now settled and there should be some decent fish out there. I've been told there's some big fish in here, hopefully we're going to catch a few. Oh, I don't believe it. Still small fish. Catch them 20 times quicker inside. In fact, they're even smaller out there than they are inside. Oh well, not to worry. There's loads of water to choose from. I think it's time we packed up and found somewhere else. Don't you? Well, we've moved and we're only a couple of miles away from where we were a little earlier. We're now on Ross Lake. So it's a superb looking lake. And as you can see, it's got numerous jetties where you can actually fish from. Now I've decided not to fish from one of the jetties today. The simple reason is that the fish are very close. In fact, the roachins, there's quite a few hybrids, they're very close. And if I fished off one of the jetties, as it's very deep, it would force me into fishing very deep water. So I've decided to fish a little bit back from the jetties so I can find around 10 or 11 foot of water. And as you can see at the moment, it's a fisher bung. Not big fish, but I've had skimmers up to 8 ounce and I'm now getting quite a few roach. What I'm had to do at the moment is I'm fishing with caster. Put a maggot on the hook. I'm plagued with those very small fish like we were catching earlier around at Ballyquirke. Also, I've fed 2 lines. I've fed just past the reeds in this 11 foot of water. 4 to 5 decent sized balls of ground bait laced with casters. And a little bit further out, maybe only 20 yards, I've put another half a dozen balls for a swim feeder attack. Now I've been told there's some bream in here up to £1.5 pounds with the occasional 2-pounder. So hopefully we might get something a little bit bigger when we go on to the swim feeder. But at the moment I'm quite happy catching these. In fact, there's that many there now. There's a few smaller fish again. I'm going to just go a little bit deeper. Fractionally off the bottom at that, and the small fish are in fact taking it as it's dropping through. So I'll just put 3 or 4 inches on. That's about right, 3 or 4 inches. The float I'm using, I think it's about 1.5 grams. Yeah, it's 1.5 grams Milo float. And I've got all the bulk weight about 18 inches from the hook itself. With just 2 little droppers, 6 inches from the hook. Simplicity in itself. Also, I'm using elastic. And there's no need to use elastic through the tip of the pole on a venue like this, but because we're in the middle of the season at home, And the stamp of fish we're catching, I've got all my elastic tips rigged up just right, and this elastic is spot on. It's a Preston blue, and it's ideal up for fish to a pound. I'm fishing a size 18 hook, single and double caster, and giving them the occasional ball of very hard ground bait. Missed that one. And the reason I'm giving it hard is that after I've fishing Ballyquirke earlier, we noticed if you put soft ground baits in, that was a no ball, that was a short one. It's better. If you put soft ground bait in, you tend to bring the small fish up in the water and just plague you from start to finish. Oh dear, that was a better fish. So by actually putting the ground bait in hard and nailing it to the deck, we're trying to sort out a few better quality fish. I'm saying at the present moment in time, put a maggot on the hook is fatal. You can only catch small fish. So it's casters, I'm afraid, or nothing. And again, there's a load of roach there at the moment. Sat here for a 5-hour session, well, you'd probably do 20 or 30 pound with the occasional bigger fish thrown in. Beautiful fish, mint condition, never been caught. In fact, only as I mentioned earlier, it's only in recent seasons that this area of Ireland has come to the fore. And I'm sure as it gets more and more popular, as it will, because there's something here for everybody. For all the families, horse riding for the kids, golf if you fancy a day off from fishing. Some beautiful walks. The Galway coastline is, I mean, it's world famous for its beauty. In fact, I had to drive round yesterday while passing a bit of time, and yeah, I mean, it is absolutely stunning. Oh. I wish this was match conditions. As I said, you need plenty of bait. Plenty of bait. Once you start to get the fish feeding, you've got to keep the bait going in. And you find that as the fish start to feed, you can even step up your tackle. Start reasonably fine. No starting with 12 hooks or 10 hooks and things like that. Start with a 16 or a 14. A few balls of ground bait occasionally, and then slowly as the day develops, build the peg up and then scale up on your tackle. Maybe you could end up fishing a 12 by the end of the day, maybe even to 2.5 pound line. But you have to build your pegs slowly, because it is a new area and the fish are not that used to anglers' bait, so they need wooing into the peg and gradually building. Oh, that's a better one. And I think it's one of them hybrids. There's a load of hybrids in, and the hybrids vary for some reason. Some hybrids you get appear to be pole's jammed. More roach than bream, but occasionally you get one that's more bream than roach. Oh, this one's more bream. I think this is a proper skimmer actually. Yeah, it's a proper skimmer, that one. I haven't had many of those. Don't forget, disgorger, always keep it handy. Now there's millions of fish here, but there's no need to damage them. Oh dear. No, beautiful fish, never caught. Scales are in absolutely perfect condition. Real good fighters. It's got a touch of roach in it, I'm sure, because you can see how big the scales are. Let's drop him back. somebody told me once, I don't know if it's true or not, but they say it's always best to actually take the casters you're using out the ground bait you've mixed. Something to do with the fact that because there's little bits of ground bait around the caster itself, it can act as a bit of an attractor. But in this depth of water, I'm sure it all gets washed off before it gets down there anyway. Right, let's see if we can get another few of those skimmers. You have to be careful when these skimmers moving, because when they do start to feed, you can very quickly lose them by not putting enough stuff in. So you have to build the pegs slowly, but when you get them there, the object is to keep them there. So you have to keep giving them something to eat. Yep, we're in again. Yeah. Peas in a pod, these now. Well, the amount of elastic stretching feels about exactly the same, similar size anyway. Watch, I'm sitting back from these weeds a bit, so I've got to be careful they don't seem to. Although they've been cut off. They've got amazingly tough lips for small fish, these. In for a real bagging session here. Let's not waste any time. Now is probably the ideal time really to step your rig up. Maybe step up to a 16 or a 14 and get a double caster on, because when they move in, they come in thick and fast. And if you're like me, you try and adapt everything to a match fishing situation. You want to put as many fish into the net as you possibly can in a shorter period of time. Oh, and again. One thing you must always do when you're fishing these shallow lakes is make sure that your net is as submerged as it possibly can. You see, I've got all the net under the water, and it makes sure that the fish, when you do catch them, have got plenty of fresh water to swim around in. Now personally, when I'm pleasure fishing, I hardly ever use a keep net. But I know if you come into Ireland for your holes, I think everybody likes to go back, with a few trophy shots. Missed it. Tell you what, I'm going to have a quick little divvy on the feeder, just see if I can get a wrap out there. Give him a couple of balls of ground bait inside just before I change. Running a bit short of bait here, could do with a few more casters. That's the worst ball of ground bait I've ever thrown in, never mind. Let's have a quick chuck on this. Now this rig's quite straightforward, very simple swim feeder method. I've been using 3 pound Maxima line, quite a fine quiver tip because there's no flow on the water, there's no pull at all there. Therefore, you need something with a fairly fine tip to give you a reasonable bite indication. I'm using a small hook length, maybe 2 foot, 2'4". A simple 8-inch link down to the feeder itself, and a Drennan plastic open-ended feeder. Now the reason I'm using a plastic open-ended feeder is quite simple. This particular lake, it goes out to about 4 foot for about 8 or 9 metres, and then it plummets. In fact, at about 30 metres, you've probably got 25, 30 feet, but it's going away from you all the time. And it's not a smooth bottom, it's all rocks and boulders and what have you. So if you use one of those wire cage feeders and you try and retrieve it, you're dragging it across the rocks. Therefore, you can easily snag up. But by using one of these feeders, once the bait has actually come out of the swim feeder itself, it acts as a bit of an aerofoil and it lifts off the bottom. So you never, in fact, get snagged. Well, say that you shouldn't get snagged. Not a difficult cast, not a long cast. Just pay the line out so it gets to the bottom. And then tighten up. Ooh, well, that didn't take long. Problem you've got here, you've got to get the rod right up in there, because as I said, it goes down, and the last thing you want to do is, no, it's not a big fish, but it's a good start. In fact, it's probably the same stamp as getting on the pole. So they're coming along quickly. Probably find as the day goes on anyway that fish will get more confidence in feeding. The thing about bream fishing over here is that, unlike in England, when you catch a bream, you're always wary to feed again in case you scare them off to the next chap. Once you get one here, you've got to keep the feed going in. Good feeder full of ground bait, full of casters, a few maggots if you need. Chop worms if you're catching big fish. Now at the moment I'm a bit reluctant to put chop worms in because the fish aren't too big. And these are ideal caster and maggot fish at the moment. It's very deep out there. I've got a count of about 11 or 12 seconds, which I would estimate to be about 23, 24 foot deep. And depending on how the fish are biting or feeding, you have two typical types of bite. You'll have the bite that just edges round slowly and stops. And that's normally when they're feeding quite well and they're really down on the food. And they're not actually tearing off once they've been hooked. They're just taking there and they're chewing up everything in front of them. You get the typical bream bite, as some people call typical, that it's there 1 minute and then it's gone right off the rest the next. Those are bites you normally get when there's not a vast amount of fish there. But the bites I'm getting at the moment, that was a liner. The tip actually went round and round again. It's as though a fish has actually swam into the line and took the tip round. There's certainly a lot of fish there at the moment. Tell a lie, it wasn't a liner. These had both my casters. When you're mixing your ground bait for swim feeder fishing, always try and mix it fairly dry. If you mix it too heavy, you'll find that it just won't come out the swim feeder. This is very lightly mixed, it's very dry. And when it actually gets to the bottom, it explodes within the feeder and actually, floods out of the feeder very quickly. You put your ground bait in too wet and too stodgy, and it just won't come out the feeder. What you end up having to do is casting the feeder out and actually shaking the feeder when it gets to the bottom. But with this ground bait, because it's soft and fluffy, it goes in, squeezes into the feeder nice, gets to the bottom, one little twitch, and it'll all just ooze out of the feeder. And you'll find that the fish will actually move in on the feeder straight away. And that's when you have to start considering how long your hook length's got to be. So I'm fishing around 2 foot, 2'6" at the moment. Now if the fish were very finicky, I'd probably fish a 3.5 foot hook length. I'd cast the swim feeder out, empty the swim feeder's bait contents onto the base of the lake, and then slowly bring the hook bait over where I've emptied the swim feeder. Conversely, if there's a lot of fish there, you can bring your hook length right the way down, maybe 10, 12 inches, because the fish home in on the swim feeder and they pick up everything that's around the swim feeder, and obviously if your hook bait is nearer the swim feeder than 3 foot, then they'll pick it up far more quickly. That was a touch. And again, that's only a small fish, this, probably a roach. Might be a small hybrid. No, it's not a small hybrid. And that is more roach than skimmer. You can tell the difference, redder fins, narrower body. The place is alive with fish now. Everywhere we go we're getting bites. I'm sure as time develops this could become quite a prolific match fishery. It's ideally situated with these stands and what have you. And the more it's fished and the more the fish get accustomed to the fact they're free food if you want it, then they'll come in. The secret with this is just getting the balance of the tip right. Hang on. This is a bit better. Forget that ledge. Already locked a feeder up on it the once. What we sometimes do when we're fishing competitions is, oh dear, it's a better fish. We fish with what's classed as a rotten bottom, whereby the link from the feeder to the main line is always a less breaking strain, I'll just show you in a second, just put this fish in. Beautiful little skimmers. Ideal waggler fish in the right depth of the water, but the problem is it's too deep. So when we fish a rotten bottom, we can see that the rig there, the length of line from the main line to the swim feeder itself, we make of less breaking strain than the main line. And that means when you're actually retrieving a fish, should the swim feeder lock up on those rocks as it comes up the ledge, all that you lose is a swim feeder, because that's the first thing that breaks. And in a match fishing situation, you'd much rather lose the occasional swim feeder than a possible match winning fish. Obviously on a pleasure day like today, that's not the case. The swim feeders is around 50-60 pence a piece. I'd rather get the swim feeder back. Always try and be as neat and tidy as you possibly can. You can see here to me left, I've got a nice convenient little tray that actually attaches to my box. And that's ideal because all I've got is a bit of ground bait, a few maggots, I've got some spare hooks on a winder. And that's all I need for a day swim feeder fishing. Spare swim feeder in my box if I need one. And it's a matter of bringing it in, rebaiting, all convenient on my left hand side, running the swim feeder through the ground bait, and then we're out again. It's none of this bending down for your ground bait over here or leading across for casters and maggots. Everything to hand. Always make sure your landing net's to hand, you've got your keep net in front of you. It's fairly shallow here, but as you see I've got the net quite submerged. But it's no good having your keep net over there and your landing net over there. As long as everything's to hand, it just makes for a much more pleasurable day's fishing. You fish some lakes over here, and although they are lakes, you get an amazing amount of tow on the water. And you can be fishing there with quite a soft tip, and it actually pulls the tip right round. That's just the current itself. But today there's very little flow, and all I'm doing is just tightening the tip slightly up to the main line. Just enough to take the pressure of the swim feeder itself. I like to take the pressure up because I've noticed today that the fish, although they're taking the bait, they're not actually running with it. And but just by taking the pressure off the main line, you're actually getting full indication on the tip. If I left any slack between the tip and the swim feeder itself, all I'd get is this feels a bit better. I say all you get by having too much slack line out is the fish would take the bait and all he'd move really is the line. And you get very little indication on the tip itself. Still no big fish, but they're all mounting up. So they are in excellent condition, very fine fights. Yeah, for the size they are, they put up a good tussle. Imagine if you're latching to shoulder 2 and 3 pounders, you'd really have to step your tackle up. Still preferring caster at the moment. Put a maggot on. Still getting plagued with small roach in bits and pieces. That's double caster, 16 hook. Nice and steady fishing. In fact, this is probably the simplest form of fishing you'll get over here. Nothing complicated, but you don't have to chuck it miles, you don't have to be that accurate with your ground baiting. Try and be reasonably accurate with your casting, I mean, because you'll build up the fish a lot quicker. And pre-baiting is also essential over here. I mean, if we'd have come down to this particular spot last night and maybe threw, what, 30 or 40 balls of ground baiting, a couple of 3 pints of maggots, we'd have probably had a shed full of fish there. Well, there's enough fish there as it is, but if the venue hasn't been fished for a few weeks or a few days, then that is the way to tackle swims over here. Because they're certainly not bait shy. There's enough fish in here and they'll soon polish it off, so you've got to keep it going. Occasionally when you're getting a few indications or a few lines, you just play just to twitch your tip a bit. Just take about 15 inches of line, just drag the feeder across the bottom, empty the remains of the ground bait in it and drag the hook bait over the ground bait that you've just emptied. Oh, it's solid, absolutely solid. Nah, it's only a small fish. Roach. Well, that's a bad sign actually if a few roach have moved in. Because all fish have got pecking orders, and I'm afraid bream always take priority over roach. So if the bream move in, they always push the roach out. And what's even worse a sign, if you go out and you catch a perch, which you know there's not a lot else there if you catch a perch. Not surprising, we haven't had any of those today. Getting a bit late in the day now. To be honest, if I was going to fish for much longer, I'd put another 3 or 4 balls of ground bait in and try and top them up again, but we've had a long day today. We've caught a fair amount of fish. Favourite time of the day, this late afternoon. Lake always goes a little bit flatter, it's not so cold. It's beautiful. There, another small fish. Well, I think that's about it for today. We've had a few varied types of fishing today. Fished 2 venues. Started this morning at Ballyquirke. We fished a slide and I was very disappointed how that went in actual fact, because it's one of my favourite methods in Ireland. It's accounted for a lot of big catches, but that's fishing. The small fish were a nuisance at times, but when we came onto that short pole to hand, gave us a lot of good sport, thoroughly enjoyable. Well, this afternoon, well, what can you say? Both methods we've fished have produced loads of fish. I'm convinced 5 or 6 hour stint on Ross Lake, and who knows, we could have 60, 70 pound quite easily. We fished long pole 9 metres. To be honest, I fished it fairly conventionally with English tactics. You know, a nice medium elastic. It was only a float taking, what, a gram and a half, 2 grams. Nothing over the top. Had we started to catch bigger fish, maybe I'd have stepped up to 2.5 grams and heavier line. But, I mean, the sport was enjoyable as it was. And we went on to the feeder. Well, what can you say about the feeder? It's the simplest method of all you can use. It was a bite a chuck, skimmer a chuck, and finally the roach moved in, just telling me that the skimmers has gone. Ideal conclusion to the day. So I've been coming to Ireland now for some 15, 16 years. If you've never visited, why don't give you a try? It's such varied fishing, there's something to suit everybody. If you're a lazy type angler and like to sit there in the sun with a cup of coffee or a bottle of Guinness, catching bream all day long, well, there's numerous venues you can do that. And there again, if you're a bit of an active angler, I'm a fairly active angler, I like to catch fish. No matter what the size of fish, I just like catching fish, small fish, big fish or wherever. Well, a place like this is ideal. You can catch short pole, long pole, feeder. You even catch a few on the waggler if you wanted. So there's venues to suit everybody. And with scenery like this, you just can't beat it. Anyway, let's have a look just exactly what we have caught this afternoon.